You're listening to the Fort Erie Podcast, your local source for upcoming events, hot new listings, and bite-sized interviews with business and community leaders. Here's your host, Brent Jones.
Hello and welcome to the Fort Erie Podcast. It is Tuesday, March 31st, 2020. You're listening to Season 2, Episode 6. I'm your host, Brent Jones, and today I'm going to have two guests for you, the first of which will be George McDermott, Fort Erie Town Councillor for Ward 1. That's the north end of town, including Bridgeburg. But first, let me start this episode by saying that well, you know how that old expression goes, right? You can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't predict the weather. And I had a lot of big plans for this season of the show, but the format seems to be rapidly changing every week in response to COVID-19. For example, in this episode, I'm not going to be covering headline news. Most of the news right now is related to either the spread or the containment of coronavirus, and I think there were better and more up-to-date sources for your information than what I can offer you. I'm also not going to be covering hot new listings this week because I just think it would be irresponsible for any realtor right now to encourage people to buy or sell a home unless it was absolutely necessary. And of course, I'm not going to cover community events. I haven't been covering community events in each episode right now because there are none. So here's what I am going to do, however. Meals on Wheels here in Fort Erie is doing great work in our community throughout this pandemic, and I'd like to show them some support. So for every person, either in Fort Erie, Ridgeway, Crystal Beach, or Stevensville, who makes a donation of any size to Fort Erie Meals on Wheels, I will give you a free Fort Erie podcast t-shirt while supplies last. It's that easy. You can actually donate online. If you access the show notes just below this episode by visiting theforteriepodcast.com, you can click the link where it says win a t-shirt and follow the instructions on screen. It's basically two parts. Step 1 is make your online donation to Meals on Wheels of any amount, and then step 2 is fill out a short form and I'll deliver a t-shirt to you while supplies last as my way of saying thanks. Now, also over the weekend, some of you might have noticed on social media that I began recognizing some of our local health heroes here in Fort Erie, healthcare professionals on the front lines who are making a difference throughout this pandemic, not only in our community, but in surrounding communities too. There were 6 individuals who I'd like to give a shout out to right now. First is my friend, neighbor, and dietary aide, Shannon Hookey, who works with Crescent Park Lodge. Also, I want to recognize Brittany Sloan, a Fort Erie registered nurse who provides home care services in Buffalo. Becky Arbick was nominated for a shout out on Facebook. She's an urgent care nurse who many of you know with Douglas Memorial Hospital. Get this, Jill Lunn and her husband Ryan Lunn, many of you know or may know from the music scene here in town. These two are manufacturing face masks from their home, then distributing them to local healthcare workers to help keep them safe. That's very cool. Jill Scott reached out to me on Facebook and nominated Lorraine Mars, another local registered nurse. And last but not least, Beck Simpson emailed me over the weekend raving about her all-time favorite professional at Douglas Memorial Hospital. That would be Katie LaMarche. So there you have it, 6 incredible people making a difference right now. And if you access the show notes below this episode, you can find photos of all 6 of these brave souls. So please do help spread the word about this Health Heroes segment. I'd like to keep it going for a couple more weeks. Our healthcare professionals don't get nearly enough recognition and praise for the selfless work that they do. Now, if you'd like to nominate a local healthcare professional to receive a shout out on a future episode of the Fort Erie Podcast, it's really simple. Visit either my Facebook page or my Instagram account. I'm at Buy with Brent. Find one of my Health Heroes posts and tag a deserving human being in the comments. I want to feature as many health heroes as I can. All right, now just before my interview with George, let me say this. He and I talked a lot about changes that he'd like to see in the north end of town. And in fact, I asked him what he thought the most pressing issues were in this area. And I'm sure if I had a time machine and I could go back in time and redo this interview, George would probably change his answer. He'd probably say the spread and containment of coronavirus is the most pressing issue facing Ward 1. But at the time we recorded this, the outbreak was barely a blip on the radar. Nonetheless, here is George to share his thoughts on the future of Ward 1. Okay, welcome back, folks. I am sitting down here with George McDermott, Councillor for Ward 1, Town of Fort Erie. Hi, George. How are you?
Hello there. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Well, thank you for speaking with me. I really appreciate that. And I'll start by asking you the same question I ask all of my guests, which is what makes Fort Erie such an awesome place to live and work?
Well, it's a great town. I'm born and raised in Fort Erie, so I've been here 68 years.
Wow.
And I suppose over the years we've noticed a pile of new residents here, but I think for the most part we need to grow in different areas as well. Residentially, we're growing by leaps and bounds.
For sure.
And over my terms of office, we've been at a record pace at setting.
For sure.
With regards to residences, as you well know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of tied into my second question. I was going to ask you, when were you first elected to council, and how long have you been serving really at this point?
Well, this will be my 6th year. I was that last term was my first term.
Okay.
And it took me a while to get here.
Okay.
But finally we did get here, and we're starting to make a difference.
Yeah, for sure. When did you first know you wanted to get involved in local politics?
Well, I've always wanted to be involved in local politics, but most of my work in the past has been getting other people elected. That's one of my specialties. So I also work with former MPP Kim Crater on Fort Erie issues, which we worked on healthcare and contracts for the racetrack and many, many different things. So I've always been in the background.
Sure.
And so I thought I would get out front and see where I landed.
Nice. Well, I guess it worked out well for you.
So far, so good.
I would say. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Ward 1 specifically. For people listening, maybe who aren't familiar, could you define the boundaries of Ward 1?
So the boundaries of Ward 1 are basically concession all the way down here to the boulevard. And then all the way down to through Jarvis and down the Niagara Boulevard, and back up through the concession area again.
Okay.
And out of the back near Pettit Road there, that's where we are. So it's a relatively big ward.
For sure.
Yeah.
Geographically, it's spread out, absolutely.
When you're knocking on doors, you'll know how big it is.
You're telling me, yeah. What would you say, and we talked a little bit before getting started with the interview. I try not to get overly political on the show by any means, but what would you describe would be some of the most pressing issues in Ward 1, and what would you say the town is doing to address some of those issues?
Well, I'd say that a number of years back when we lost our downtowns basically to the big box stores, one thing that people miss in a small community is that downtown feel like we used to have a number of years ago when I was a kid, when Jarvis Street was a boomer.
Right.
And so what we've been trying to do since I took office is to revitalize the downtown with new business and trying to get the coal docks in the coal docks park down at the boulevard, trying to manage to get a waterfront park there. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. And, other things like that come up, where you have little crime sprees going on, and you have to kind of put out those fires. We had a period of time where it was just nuts.
Right.
And I got the police to come to council.
Right.
We held a public meeting amongst the people of the ward. It was very well attended. It was packed.
Right.
Made sure that all of their answers and all their concerns were dealt with, and crime has significantly dwindled since that meeting.
Good.
Yeah, put the attention on that.
Well, we'll get back to talking a little bit about Ward 1, but for the benefit of people listening who maybe don't know you individually, I want to have just kind of a quick rapid-fire question round with you here, a little bit of trivia about yourself, I guess. So first answer that comes to mind, just blurt it out, all right? Okay. So let's start here. How many kids do you have?
I have 2 kids.
2 kids?
Yes.
Do you think rats are cute as pets?
I wouldn't know about that.
Do you consider yourself to be politically correct?
Most of the time, yes.
Most of the time. What is your favorite car of all time?
Corvette.
A Corvette, okay. Do you know how to salsa dance?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
It's on my bucket list, though.
Lots of time. On a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you at playing pickleball?
James is much better at playing pickleball than I am, or Stephen Passero, because Stephen Passero, the first time he played pickleball, he got hurt.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'll have to ask about that story.
So I haven't really jumped into pickleball yet, but I'm sure that opportunity is coming forward.
How many cups of coffee per day do you drink?
I drink probably 8 cups of coffee a day.
Yeah? About 8. Wow. Right on par with me. Okay, that concludes the rapid fire question round. So hopefully everyone got to learn a little something more about you today. So let's jump into, I know we were talking a little bit about some of the pressing issues in Ward 1, and you made the comparison to downtown Ridgeway doing quite well. How many years out do you realistically think it would take, say, Jarvis Street to look more like Ridge Road?
Well, a lot of things have to happen. So presently, right now, we have a streetscaping plan in the works for Jarvis Street. We're in the planning right now. And as soon as that's done, then what we'll do is we'll pursue that three-way funding, because it's about a $6 million investment in the downtown.
Yeah.
So exciting, but it takes forever. And, like everything in politics.
Things very often do. Right. That's great. Well, thank you for spending some time with me today, George. I really appreciate it. Okay. And welcome back. Folks, have you ever wondered what the pros and cons are of buying a new build home versus a resale home? If so, here is my friend, colleague, and teammate Cheryl Ahern of RE/MAX Niagara Realty to share some of her thoughts.
The advantages of buying resale versus a new build is if there's going to be any issues, those issues most likely have surfaced, such as settling or just things that can happen in a new build have already happened. Landscaping has typically been done. Extras to the home have been there. So to sort of summarize, I'd say you get better value sometimes with resale than new. And that new isn't necessarily as problem-free as people often think that it will be.
And one more time, welcome back. So to conclude today's episode, I want to introduce my second guest. Many of you may already know Drew Gauthier. He was born and raised in Fort Erie, but the reason I'm having him on the show is he's the co-host of a podcast with Goat, one of the few other podcasts based in this area, aside from my own. So I invited Drew to join me for a phone call. We'll get to that in just one sec. Check out the show notes below this episode for links on where you can connect with Drew and find his podcast. Oh, and guess what? 2 weeks ago, I was his guest on a podcast with Goat. So you can go back and take a look for that episode if you wish. Join me next week, next Tuesday, April 7th for Season 2, Episode 7 of the Fort Erie podcast. I'll be chatting with Pat and Nao of the Ridge Film House in Ridgeway. Take care, everybody, and stay safe and stay healthy out there.
My name is Drew Gauthier. I'm proud to say I was born and raised in Fort Erie. I lived there for about 19 years, and then I moved back after a few years, so probably 20 years in total. I think what I love about Fort Erie, I think the most is the community itself. Growing up in Fort Erie, it was such a fun place, and it still is, and it's growing and it's continued to grow, and that's amazing. But what I love about Fort Erie, I love the people. It's simple, and I am proud to say I'm from Fort Erie. Yeah, sure. A podcast with Goat is a podcast that me and my best friend Anthony Maslin started about a year ago now. We've been on this journey. The podcast it covers a little bit of everything. We talk about the world issues. We cover a lot of sports. We cover just stuff that's intriguing to us and stuff that we just stuff we want to talk about. We even cover stuff you hear about in the news in Florida, like crazy Florida man stories. We have a lot of fun. We've been doing it for a year. We have great support from the community, which is incredible. So we're thankful for that. We're available pretty much anywhere you can listen to podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, and you can watch us on YouTube, all at A Podcast with Goat.
You've been listening to the Fort Erie Podcast with your host, Brent Jones, a sales representative with RE/MAX Niagara Realty Limited Brokerage. Follow at Buy with Brent on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates. Subscribe to the Fort Erie Podcast on popular platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and catch a new bite-sized episode every week. Until next time.